There are moments in life that reveal the true nature of people. Moments that challenge everything you thought you knew about power, wealth, and judgment. One such moment began in a high-end luxury store where a simple woman, dressed modestly and with nothing but a quiet confidence to her name, walked in, hoping to treat herself to something special. What she did not expect, however, was the cold reception that awaited her, a reception that would soon lead to a shocking turn of events. Standing at the entrance of the prestigious store, Emma took a deep breath. She was no stranger to judgment. In fact, it had followed her throughout her life. People often looked at her, sizing her up, drawing conclusions based on her appearance, assuming that her simple clothing meant she was not someone who could afford the finest. Yet, she never let these assumptions affect her. Emma had learned long ago that the value of a person does not lie in the clothes they wear or the brand they carry. It lies in who they are inside. But today, she was here to do something for herself. A simple treat, an indulgence that she had earned after years of hard work. As she walked into the store, the sleek, modern design of the space greeted her. Everything was pristine, every piece of merchandise carefully placed. It was the kind of store where the elite came to buy, and where appearances mattered more than anything else. Emma's plain dress, simple shoes, and understated style were an immediate contrast to the opulence that surrounded her. She was greeted by a store attendant who, with a quick glance at her attire, hesitated. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the attendant said, her tone sharp. "This is a luxury store? Are you sure you're in the right place?" The words stung, but Emma did not flinch. She calmly handed over the brochure she had picked up earlier and smiled politely. "I would like to see your collection of designer handbags," she said, her voice steady, despite the humiliation beginning to settle in her chest. The attendant took the brochure, scanning it with a look of skepticism, then, without a word, turned on her heel and walked away. Emma stood there, holding her breath, wondering whether she should leave, but she did not. She was not here to prove anything to anyone. She was simply here for herself. What happened next, however, would prove that not everything is as it seems, and what Emma did not know was that her husband was about to walk through that door, changing the entire dynamic of the situation. A billionaire whose name commanded respect, he was a man who could buy anything in this world. But he had something far more valuable than money. He had the power to correct the wrongs others might never see. And the moment he entered that store would leave everyone, including Emma, completely shocked. Emma stood in the store, quietly trying to collect her thoughts as the minutes passed. She had always believed that material things didn't define a person's worth. But in that moment, it was hard not to feel the sting of being overlooked, dismissed, and judged solely based on her appearance. The cool air of the luxury store felt like a heavy weight on her shoulders, a stark contrast to the warm, welcoming environments she usually sought. She had thought this experience would be one of self-indulgence, a rare opportunity to enjoy the finer things in life, but instead, it had turned into something entirely different. As she waited, unsure whether to continue or leave the store entirely, she caught glimpses of other customers who seemed to fit the mold of the store's expected clientele. Well-dressed, fashionable, and seemingly wealthy. They walked past her, some glancing at her briefly, but none giving her a second thought. The world of high-end luxury shopping was not designed for people like her, or at least that's how it felt. But Emma refused to let the judgment affect her. She wasn't here to compete with anyone or seek their approval. She was here to purchase something that was meaningful to her, not for the validation of others. And she would not let a few dismissive glances or rude comments define her experience. Just as she was about to turn and walk out, a man entered the store. He was tall, with a commanding presence that seemed to fill the space around him. His sharp suit and perfectly groomed appearance drew immediate attention. But it wasn't just his outward appearance that captured the room's attention. It was the way he moved, the quiet power he exuded with each step. He was a man who didn't need to speak to be noticed. As he walked past the display of luxury handbags, his eyes met Emma's. He paused for a brief moment, his gaze locking with hers. There was something familiar about him, but Emma couldn't quite place it. Without breaking eye contact, he nodded politely and continued his walk through the store, seemingly unaware of the small stir his presence had caused. What neither Emma nor the store attendants knew was that this man, with his quiet confidence and powerful air, was about to turn the tables on everything that had happened. He was none other than Emma's husband, Max, the majority owner of the very company that owned this luxury store. And when Max walked through that door, he was not just any other customer. He was the one person who could change the entire atmosphere of the room with a single word. The attendant, who had dismissed Emma moments earlier, suddenly stood straighter, her posture now stiff and uneasy. She had no idea who Emma was married to, but as Max walked towards her, a palpable sense of realization hit her. The mood in the store shifted instantly, and the previous dismissive behavior was about to become the greatest mistake anyone could have made. Max moved through the store with ease, his every step confident and purposeful. He was well aware of the effect he had on people, but he never flaunted it. His reputation preceded him, yet he never needed to assert his power in the way others did. As he walked, the staff who had previously been so dismissive toward Emma suddenly grew tense, as though they sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Max's presence was commanding, yet not overtly aggressive. He didn't need to raise his voice or make demands to ensure that he was noticed. His influence and authority were simply understood. Max's eyes scanned the store, but his focus immediately zeroed in on Emma, standing near the handbag section. She had not moved since he entered, her posture still composed despite the judgment she had experienced moments earlier. He could tell something had been wrong, and as he made his way over to her, the attendant who had been ignoring her suddenly seemed to realize something she hadn't before. The woman she had so casually dismissed was married to this man. Max stopped beside Emma, his voice calm but firm as he addressed the staff. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his gaze sharp but not harsh. The question hung in the air, drawing the attention of every employee and customer in the store. Emma, caught off guard by his sudden arrival, looked up at him in surprise. She hadn't expected him to show up here, let alone intervene. The attendant, who had been so quick to judge Emma just moments earlier, faltered. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced with a nervous energy. "No, sir," she said quickly, her words stumbling over each other. "Just a small misunderstanding. We were just clarifying her reservation." Emma's eyes widened slightly. She had made no reservation. She had come into the store just as any other customer would, expecting to browse and possibly make a purchase. There was no reservation to be cleared. Yet she had been treated like an outsider from the moment she stepped in. Max, who had been observing the entire interaction with a quiet intensity, turned his attention back to Emma. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, a hint of concern evident. Emma gave him a small nod, though she was still processing the situation. She had expected judgment in many places, but she had never imagined it would come from the staff of a store like this. The irony stung. "Thank you, but I think we're done here," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the discomfort she felt. She had always prided herself on not needing validation from others, but that didn't mean she was immune to the sting of being judged unfairly. Max's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that told everyone in the store that this moment was far from over. He wasn't just Emma's husband. He was the man who owned the very store they were standing in, and he was about to make it clear that the treatment Emma had received was unacceptable, no matter who the customer was. With a quick glance at the store manager, Max took Emma's hand in his. "I think it's time to go," he said, leading her towards the door. The staff watched them leave, stunned into silence. What had started as a simple trip to a luxury store had quickly turned into a lesson in power, respect, and what happens when you misjudge someone based on their appearance. As they stepped outside, the cool air felt like a relief. Emma glanced up at Max, her heart still racing from the sudden shift in the room. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of gratitude and lingering confusion. She had never asked him to step in, but she was grateful he had. She knew that, had it been anyone else, they would never have stood up for her in the same way. Max gave her a reassuring smile, his hand still gently holding hers. "It's my pleasure," he said, his voice warm and steady. "No one gets to treat you like that, not while I'm around." And with that, Emma knew that this experience was not just about what had happened in the store. It was a reminder that sometimes the people who you think have nothing are the ones who hold the most power. As they walked away from the store, the echoes of the earlier tension still lingered in Emma's mind. The cool breeze of the outside world felt different now, as though it carried with it the weight of everything that had just transpired. She had never expected to find herself in such an uncomfortable situation, let alone be treated with such blatant disregard in a place that was meant to offer luxury and service. But what struck her most was the realization that her worth had never been about the clothes she wore or the label on her handbag. It was about who she was and how she carried herself. Max, always perceptive, could sense that Emma was still processing the events. He slowed his pace, pulling her gently to the side as they walked down the street. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with concern. He had seen Emma handle countless challenges with grace, but this was different. This wasn't about business deals or social gatherings. This was personal. Emma met his gaze, taking a moment to gather her thoughts before she spoke. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice betrayed a hint of frustration. "It's just, I thought I was used to this. I've faced judgment before, but I didn't expect it here. It's a store, Max, a place where people come to spend money. And yet, I felt like I wasn't even welcome." Max's expression hardened as he listened, but he didn't interrupt. He understood more than anyone how difficult it was for Emma to accept that kind of treatment. For her, it was never about standing out or fitting into a world that didn't value authenticity. She had always believed in earning respect, not demanding it. "I know," Max replied, his voice low but firm. "But let me be clear, what happened in there was wrong. It's not just about the store or the people who treated you that way. It's about something bigger. It's about the assumption that your value can be determined by your appearance. That people like you, people who work hard, who have earned their place in the world, can be dismissed because we don't fit the mold." Emma nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle in. It wasn't about the store. It wasn't about the staff or the judgmental looks from the other customers. It was about a larger societal issue, the tendency to value people based on their outward appearance rather than their character, their accomplishments, or their heart. Max gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "That's why I stepped in, not because I wanted to make a scene or embarrass anyone, but because you deserve better, and you shouldn't have to prove yourself to anyone, especially not in a place where people should be treating you with the respect you've already earned." Emma felt a surge of gratitude wash over her, and for the first time that evening a small smile tugged at her lips. "Thank you, Max, but honestly, I didn't need you to do that. I've always wanted to handle things on my own, but I appreciate it. I appreciate you standing up for me." Max smiled, his eyes softening. "You don't ever have to handle things on your own, Emma. We're a team. Always." As they continued walking, the tension that had been so palpable in the store began to dissipate. Emma felt lighter, as though the burden of judgment and the need to prove herself had been lifted. She knew that she didn't need anyone's approval. She had Max's support, yes, but more importantly, she had her own sense of self-worth. No amount of judgment or dismissive behavior could take that away from her. Little did they know, however, that the events of the evening were far from over. What had started as a simple shopping trip was about to escalate in a way neither of them could have predicted. Max's influence, his connection to the store, and his position in the business world would soon come into play, and the people who had wronged Emma were about to face the consequences of their actions in a way that would change everything. And this time, there would be no mistaking Emma's worth. Not in the store, not in the world, and certainly not in the eyes of those who had once dismissed her. As Emma and Max continued walking through the city, the streets seemed to open up before them, as if the world was starting to shift in their favor. The weight of the store incident had lifted, but the underlying feeling of injustice lingered in Emma's mind. It wasn't just the way she had been treated. It was the realization that despite everything she had accomplished, there were still people out there who would judge her based on her appearance, not her abilities or her worth. The thought gnawed at her, making her feel both angry and disillusioned. Max, sensing that Emma was still deep in thought, reached over and gently took her hand. "Emma," he said quietly, pulling her out of her reverie, "I don't want you to dwell on what happened. You don't need their validation. You never did." Emma gave him a small, appreciative smile, but didn't say anything at first. She wasn't sure how to express what she was feeling. She had always prided herself on her independence and the ability to stand up for herself. Yet, the treatment she had received at the luxury store had hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't just about the clothes she wore or the judgment from strangers. It was about the fact that her worth, in that moment, had been questioned in the most humiliating way. "I know," she replied finally, her voice soft but firm. "But it's hard, Max. It's hard to know that, no matter how much I achieve, some people will never see me for who I am. They'll only see what they want to see." Max stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her completely. His gaze was steady, his eyes filled with sincerity. "That's their loss," he said, his voice calm but full of conviction. "The people who judge you based on what you wear or how you look, they aren't the ones who matter. It's the people who truly see you, who know your heart and your work, that count." Emma's heart softened at his words. She knew Max was right. He always was. But that didn't change the fact that the world could be a harsh place, especially for someone like her. She had spent years building a reputation for herself, proving that she didn't need anyone else's approval to succeed. And yet, in moments like this, it was hard not to feel small, insignificant, and invisible in the eyes of those who had no idea who she truly was. Max's grip on her hand tightened slightly, as though sensing her inner struggle. "I know you're strong, Emma, but you don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you, and I always will be." Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know I don't have to do it alone, but sometimes it's just hard to remember that when the world keeps telling you that you're not enough." Max gave her a reassuring smile. "You are more than enough, Emma, and you always have been. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." As they continued walking, the city around them felt more like home than it ever had before. The crowd seemed to part for them as they moved through the streets, the world outside fading into the background. Emma realized that Max was right. What mattered was not how others saw her, but how she saw herself. And with Max by her side, she knew she could face anything the world threw at her. But Emma's story was far from over. While she was beginning to feel a sense of peace, the events at the store had set a chain of events in motion that neither she nor Max could have anticipated. The people who had judged her were about to face the consequences of their actions in a way that would leave them with more than just a lesson learned. They would be left reeling from a reality they could never have imagined. Max had a plan, and it was one that would turn the tables in a way they could not yet fathom. He had the power, the influence, and the means to right the wrongs Emma had suffered, and he was about to use all of it to ensure that no one would ever treat her, or anyone else, like that again. The next morning, after the shock of the previous evening had settled into something more manageable, Max had an air of calm determination about him. Emma could tell that the events at the store had not only affected her but had deeply resonated with him as well. He had always been a man of action, but now it was clear he had a plan in mind. As they sat in their home office later that day, Max glanced over at Emma, who was quietly sipping her coffee, lost in her thoughts. He knew that she didn't want him to make a big scene about what happened at the store, but he couldn't just let it slide. No, what had happened to Emma wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a reflection of something deeper, of a society that too often valued appearances over substance, power over people, and wealth over character. And that, Max knew, needed to change. "Emma," he said, his voice steady as he looked at her, "I've made some calls. I want to make sure this doesn't happen again." Emma looked up at him, eyebrows raised. "Max, I told you last night I don't want any drama. I don't need anyone to apologize or make a fuss. It's over." Max shook his head, his expression serious but gentle. "It's not over. Not for me. Not for you. What happened at that store wasn't just about a misunderstanding. It was about the treatment of a person based solely on their appearance, and I won't stand for it. No one should." Emma took a deep breath, understanding the gravity of his words. She had always known that Max's sense of justice was unwavering, but she didn't want him to feel like he had to fix everything for her. She had been humiliated, yes, but she didn't want to rely on his power to make things right. Still, she knew Max was determined, and his mind was already made up. "I know you want to fix it," she said softly, "but what if making a big deal of it only makes it worse?" Max smiled, his confidence in her evident. "I'm not doing this for us, Emma. I'm doing it for everyone who's ever been dismissed based on their appearance. The people who walked in there last night didn't just judge you. They judged anyone who didn't look like them, and that's something that needs to be addressed. You may not need validation from anyone, but others do. We can use this moment to make a change." Max stood up, pacing slightly as he thought through the next steps. "I'm going to have a word with the store's owner, and I'm going to make sure the staff understands that they cannot treat people like that. We'll start a training program, a program that focuses on empathy, respect, and how to treat every customer with the dignity they deserve, regardless of their appearance." Emma could see the resolve in Max's eyes. She knew there was no stopping him once he had his mind set on something, and part of her admired his unwavering commitment to making things right, even when she didn't want the attention. Still, she couldn't help but feel a little uneasy about the way this was unfolding, but she also knew that his heart was in the right place. He wasn't doing this out of pride or a need to prove something. He was doing it because he believed that no one should ever feel less than anyone else based on how they looked. Max paused for a moment, his gaze meeting Emma's. "And I want you to know, Emma, that I'm doing this not just because you're my wife, but because you're one of the strongest people I know. You've built your life on your own terms, and you've shown the world who you are, regardless of the way they've treated you. That's something worth standing up for." Emma's heart swelled with gratitude at his words. She didn't want or need to be treated like a victim, but Max's words reminded her of the importance of fighting for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. She had always believed that her worth came from within, and now Max was giving her the opportunity to prove that others' worth wasn't any different. Max's next steps were clear. He had already made plans to meet with the store's management, and the training program he was about to implement would set the tone for how customers would be treated from that moment forward. Emma realized that, in the end, this wasn't just about the luxury store. It was about something much bigger. It was about changing the way people perceived each other and making sure no one was ever judged unfairly again. And with Max's influence, they were going to make sure of it. As Max walked out to make the phone calls that would set his plan into motion, Emma stood by the window, watching the city below. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would always stand up for herself. And with Max by her side, they would fight to make sure no one ever felt invisible again. Emma's journey had been about more than just a moment of humiliation. It had been about standing up for what's right, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. Through the power of integrity and support, she had turned a painful experience into an opportunity to make a change. Max's actions and Emma's quiet strength showed the world that true value is not determined by appearances, but by the character within. Now, it's your turn. Have you ever been judged or underestimated because of how you looked? Or maybe you've seen someone else treated unfairly based on their appearance? We want to hear your story. Share your experiences in the comments below and join the conversation. If you believe in treating everyone with dignity and respect, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next powerful story. Together, we can challenge assumptions and create a world where everyone's worth is recognized, no matter what they wear. Remember, it's not what you look like, it's who you are that truly counts. See you in the next story.